I never imagined that calling a waitress deaf and useless would be the catalyst for dismantling my carefully constructed world, brick by arrogant brick. It was a Tuesday, late morning, the kind of New York City Tuesday that's deceptively bright, a sharp sun glinting off the polished steel of skyscrapers, hinting at a beauty that I, in my self-absorbed haste, often overlooked. My routine was rigid, a testament to the discipline that had forged my empire. Early morning workout, a quick scan of the financial markets, then breakfast at the Sterling Spoon, a place that oozed old money elegance and served the best eggs Benedict this side of the Atlantic. It was a sanctuary of hushed conversations and clinking silverware, a perfect backdrop for my self-importance. I, Arthur Sterling, demanded perfection, and usually I got it. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and toasted sourdough usually greeted me, a comforting embrace that signified the start of another victorious day. But on this particular Tuesday, something was off. My usual corner booth, meticulously set with a crisp white tablecloth and a single crimson rose, felt different. It was the same booth, the same opulent mahogany paneling, the same muted velvet upholstery, yet a subtle disquiet settled over me even before Sarah, the new waitress, approached. She was young, perhaps early 20s, with a cascade of dark, slightly unruly hair that seemed to defy the severe ponytail she tried to tame it with. Her eyes, a startling shade of hazel, held a quiet intensity that I, in my arrogance, would soon mistake for meekness. She moved with an almost ethereal grace, a stark contrast to the bustling energy of the city just outside the panoramic windows. I'd seen her around for a few weeks, a fleeting presence, rarely crossing my path as my usual waiter. An older, seasoned professional named Marcus knew my order by heart. But Marcus was nowhere to be seen, a detail that already began to grate on my nerves. Predictability was my comfort zone, and Sarah's presence in Marcus's stead was an unwelcome disruption. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper against the gentle hum of the restaurant. She held a small notepad and a pen, poised, her gaze steady, though a faint blush dusted her cheeks. Perhaps intimidated, I thought, a familiar sensation I often evoked in those who served me. I offered a curt nod, not bothering to return her greeting. Politeness, in my world, was a commodity exchanged only between equals, and she, a waitress, was not. "I'll have my usual," I stated, my voice sharp, leaving no room for questions. "Eggs Benedict, crispy bacon on the side, a double espresso, black, and a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice. And make sure the eggs are perfectly poached, the yolks still runny, but the whites completely set. Not too much hollandaise." I rattled off the precise instructions, a practiced litany designed to establish dominance and ensure my exacting standards were met. I watched her, expecting her to write it all down, perhaps even repeat it back, but she simply held my gaze, her expression unchanging. A flicker of annoyance stirred within me. Was she trying to memorize it? Unprofessional. "Did you get all that?" I asked, a hint of impatience coloring my tone. "Yes, Mr. Sterling," she replied, her voice still quiet, but with a surprising undertone of, what, confidence? Defiance? I couldn't quite place it, and that bothered me. She turned and walked towards the kitchen, her silhouette momentarily framed against the bright window. I watched her go, a knot of irritation tightening in my stomach. Something about her calm demeanor, her lack of obsequiousness, rubbed me the wrong way. I was used to deference, to swift, silent execution of my wishes. She had an aura of quiet strength that I found unsettling. 20 minutes later, my breakfast arrived. Not by Sarah, but by a different, older waiter, a man whose face I recognized but whose name I couldn't recall. He placed the plate before me with an almost apologetic air. My gaze immediately fell upon the eggs Benedict. The hollandaise was generous, perhaps even excessive, and the eggs themselves, they were clearly overcooked. The whites were rubbery, and a quick poke with my fork confirmed my worst fear. The yolk was solid. My perfectly runny yolk, my morning ritual, ruined. And the bacon, limp, not crispy. A cold fury began to simmer within me. This wasn't just a mistake, it was an affront, a direct challenge to my expectations, a disregard for my explicit instructions. I looked up, scanning the room for Sarah, but she was nowhere in sight. The older waiter lingered, his eyes darting nervously between my face and the offending plate. "Where is she?" I demanded, my voice low but laced with steel. "The waitress who took my order," he stammered. She's in the back, sir. I believe she had to step away for a moment." "Step away?" I scoffed. "She couldn't even get a simple order right. This is unacceptable." My words hung in the air, drawing a few hushed glances from nearby tables. I didn't care. The world revolved around my dissatisfaction. Just then, Sarah reappeared from the kitchen, a tray of coffee cups balanced expertly in one hand. She started towards another table, but my voice, sharp and cutting, stopped her dead in her tracks. "You!" I barked, pointing a finger at my plate. "Look at this! This is not what I ordered. The eggs are overcooked, the bacon is limp, and there's too much sauce. Did you even listen to me?" Her hazel eyes widened slightly, and she paused, her shoulders tightening almost imperceptibly. She turned to face me fully, the coffee tray held steady. "I apologize, Mr. Sterling. I wrote it down exactly as you said." "Then you must be deaf," I retorted, my voice rising a notch, the controlled anger now seeping into my words. "Or just plain useless. This is an embarrassment. Get this out of my sight and bring me a new order, and this time try to actually hear what I'm saying." The word deaf hung in the air, a cruel, blunt instrument. Her face, which had been pale, flushed a deep crimson. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. She simply stared at me, a flicker of something raw and hurt in her eyes, before she turned and walked back towards the kitchen, the coffee tray now shaking slightly in her hand. The older waiter quickly swooped in, whisking away my plate with a mumbled apology, his gaze fixed on the floor. A hush had fallen over my immediate vicinity. People were watching, of course, they always did. I reveled in the power, the ability to command attention, to make even the wealthiest patrons understand that Arthur Sterling was not to be trifled with. Yet beneath the triumph of my indignation, a strange, unsettling echo reverberated. Her eyes, that look. It was not one of simple defeat, but something deeper, something I couldn't quite decipher. But I quickly pushed it aside. My breakfast was wrong, and that was all that mattered. If this beginning already made you question what you thought you knew, imagine what's coming next. So go ahead, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because here, every video reveals something few dare to show. The new plate of eggs. Benedict arrived swiftly, delivered by Marcus himself, whose seasoned face wore an expression of practiced neutrality, though I detected a faint wrinkle of concern between his brows. He placed the perfectly poached eggs, the crispy bacon, and the precisely measured hollandaise before me. This time, everything was impeccable. I took a bite, the creamy yolk bursting in my mouth, the crispiness of the bacon, a delightful counterpoint. It was exactly as I liked it, yet the satisfaction was tainted, a bitter aftertaste that lingered despite the culinary perfection. The incident with Sarah had unsettled me more than I cared to admit. I ate in silence, the usual enjoyment of my meal replaced by a low thrum of irritation, occasionally punctuated by a flash of unease. My mind replayed Sarah's reaction, that fleeting look in her eyes, not anger, but a profound sadness, almost resignation. It was a reaction I was unaccustomed to. Usually, my sharp words elicited either fear or obsequiousness. Her response was different, a quiet dignity that, in its own way, was more impactful than any outburst. I tried to dismiss it, to rationalize my behavior. She was a waitress. She made a mistake, I corrected her. That was the natural order of things in my world. Efficiency and precision were paramount, and incompetence in any form was to be eradicated. I had built my financial empire on these principles. But the silence that followed my outburst at my table felt heavier than usual. The hushed whispers from the neighboring tables seemed to carry more weight, less of admiration for my authority and more of judgment. Or was that just my imagination? I prided myself on my imperviousness to public opinion, especially that of strangers in a restaurant, but the thought persisted. I glanced around discreetly. A middle-aged couple across the room, who had been enjoying their coffee, now seemed to be purposefully avoiding eye contact, their conversation a low murmur. A businessman engrossed in his laptop had paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, his gaze briefly flicking in my direction before he quickly returned to his screen. This wasn't my usual effect. Normally, my displays of power solidified my position, instilled a certain fear and respect. Today, it felt different. I took a deep breath, pushing down the burgeoning feeling of discomfort. This was simply a minor annoyance, a brief ripple in the otherwise smooth surface of my perfectly ordered life. After finishing my meal, I placed a crisp $100 bill on the table, a generous tip even for Marcus, but meant as a gesture of my magnanimity, a way to signal that the incident was over, resolved. It was a common tactic: assert dominance, then smooth things over with money. It usually worked like a charm, a transactional balm for any ruffled feathers. Marcus approached, his expression still carefully neutral as he collected my plate and the bill. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice flat. He hesitated for a moment, then added, "Sarah, she's a good kid, sir. She's been through a lot." My brow furrowed. "A good kid? She can't even get an order right, Marcus. That's not good. That's inefficient." I hated personal excuses for professional shortcomings. It blurred the lines, introduced sentimentality where only sharp business acumen should exist. Marcus simply nodded, his gaze distant, and then walked away, leaving me with a sense of lingering dissatisfaction. I found myself watching Sarah from afar as I waited for my car to be brought around. She was now clearing tables, moving with the same quiet efficiency I had noticed earlier. There was a slight slump to her shoulders, an almost imperceptible weariness that hadn't been there at the start of her shift. My gaze fixated on her ears. Were they different? I couldn't tell from this distance, but the thought, once planted, began to sprout. Was there something I had missed? No, that was ridiculous. I was Arthur Sterling. I missed nothing. I was always in control, always aware. But the seed of doubt, small and insidious, had been planted. I remembered a similar incident from years ago, early in my career, when I'd been a young, aggressive broker, clawing my way up the corporate ladder. I had publicly humiliated a junior analyst for a minor error on a report. I'd called him brainless in front of the entire trading floor. He'd quit that day, I later heard, and disappeared from the industry. At the time, I'd felt a surge of triumph, a confirmation of my own strength and resolve. It was a dog-eat-dog world, and I was the alpha. Now a faint chill ran down my spine, a ghost of a memory stirring. The analyst had been quiet too, almost painfully shy. I'd dismissed his silence as weakness. Was I doing the same thing again? No, I told myself, shaking off the unwelcome introspection. That was different. This was just a waitress, an anonymous face in a sea of service staff. My outburst was justified. I paid for a premium service, and I expected it. Anything less was a failure on their part, not mine. My reputation, my time, my entire existence was built on these expectations. It was how I maintained order in my chaotic world. I remember my father, a man of humble beginnings, who had worked tirelessly as a mechanic, always emphasizing the value of hard work and respect, no matter one's station. He taught me to look people in the eye, to acknowledge their humanity, but I had dismissed those lessons as quaint, idealistic notions belonging to a bygone era. In the cutthroat world of finance, sentimentality was a liability and empathy a weakness. I had chosen a different path, one paved with ambition and relentless drive, where the only currency that truly mattered was power. My father, in his quiet way, had disapproved of my growing detachment, my escalating arrogance. He'd warned me that money could harden a man's heart, blind him to the simple truths of human connection. I'd shrugged him off, convinced that he simply didn't understand the realities of my world, the sheer brutal force required to succeed. As I stood by the restaurant entrance, waiting for my valet, the image of Sarah's face, that specific flicker of pain in her eyes, resurfaced. It was a persistent image, stubbornly refusing to be relegated to the dusty corners of my memory. It wasn't the look of a typical server who had just been chewed out, which was usually a mixture of embarrassment and suppressed anger. Hers was deeper, more personal. It was as if I had struck a nerve, not just professionally, but personally. I glanced back towards the bustling dining room. Sarah was now serving a table of elderly women, her movements precise, her smile gentle as she poured their tea. She even bent down slightly, leaning in to hear one of the women more clearly, nodding patiently as the woman spoke. This observation, though minor, registered in my mind. She was attentive, polite, not useless, not by any stretch of the imagination. And yet I had called her exactly that. My car, a sleek black Mercedes-Benz S-Class, pulled up to the curb, its engine a low purr. The valet, a young man with a polite but weary smile, held the door open for me. As I slid into the sumptuous leather interior, the thought of Sarah and her quiet dignity lingered. For the first time in a long time, the usual sense of triumphant power that accompanied my daily rituals felt hollow, replaced by a subtle, creeping sense of unease. It was like a faint, discordant note in an otherwise perfect symphony, and I, a man obsessed with harmony and control, found it deeply irritating. I tried to shake it off, to focus on the day's agenda, the looming deals, the quarterly reports, but her image, the memory of her pained expression, remained, an unwelcome guest in the fortress of my mind. You already heard a similar story like this? Tell me in the comments if this detail surprised you and share your theory. Over the next few days, my usual sense of unshakable confidence began to fray at the edges, a subtle unraveling I furiously tried to ignore. The image of Sarah's face, the slight tremor in her hands as she carried that coffee tray, haunted my peripheral vision. It wasn't just the memory of the incident itself, but the lingering sensation that I had overstepped, crossed a line that even my own hardened conscience usually managed to skirt. I kept telling myself it was nothing, a minor blip, a necessary assertion of standards in a world that constantly threatened to descend into mediocrity. Yet, the justification felt hollow. I returned to the sterling spoon, as was my habit, determined to re-establish my equilibrium. I fully expected to see Sarah, perhaps even hoped for a chance to make a silent performative amends, maybe a larger tip, a curt nod of acknowledgement, anything to banish that unsettling memory. But she wasn't there. Marcus was back, serving me with his usual practiced efficiency, avoiding any mention of the previous incident. It was a relief, in a way, to revert to the familiar, but it also amplified the strange sense of incompleteness. Her absence was more jarring than her presence. I found myself scanning the dining room more intently, searching for her cascade of dark hair, her quiet grace. Each time I didn't see her, a peculiar blend of frustration and a vague, unsettling curiosity stirred within me. Had she been fired? Had she quit? The thought that my words might have cost her her job, even if a fleeting one, sent a cold shard of discomfort through me. I, Arthur Sterling, was a man who rarely felt regret. I made decisions, often ruthless ones, and I stood by them. But this felt different. One afternoon, a few days later, while waiting for my lunch at a different, less formal cafe a few blocks from my office, I overheard a conversation between two baristas. They were talking about a new girl, Sarah, who had just started, working extra shifts to cover for someone sick. "She's so quiet," one said, "but she works her tail off, and that hearing aid, poor thing." Must be tough working in this noise. My coffee cup froze midway to my lips. Hearing aid. The words resonated with a chilling clarity, sending a jolt through me. Deaf, useless. My own cruel words echoed in the suddenly too loud cafe. The barista's casual mention of a hearing aid clicked into place, illuminating Sarah's reactions, her quiet voice, her slight lean-in to hear the elderly woman with a horrifying, undeniable truth. It wasn't just a misstep on her part. It was a profound misjudgment on mine. A sickening wave of nausea washed over me, churning in my stomach. I felt a flush spread across my face, not of anger, but of a searing shame. I had called a woman with a hearing impairment deaf as an insult, oblivious to her actual condition. The irony was brutal, the cruelty unforgivable. My carefully constructed facade of control began to crack. All my justifications, all my rationalizations about standards and efficiency crumbled under the weight of this new information. I wasn't just an exacting customer. I was a bully. A blind, arrogant fool who had verbally assaulted someone for a condition they couldn't control. The image of her wounded eyes, the quiet dignity that I had mistaken for meekness, now transformed into an image of immense resilience in the face of my casual cruelty. I paid for my coffee, leaving it untouched, and practically bolted from the cafe, the noise of the city suddenly oppressive, amplifying the ringing in my ears that mimicked the phantom sound of my own harsh words. I needed to do something. Anything. But what? An apology, however sincere, felt utterly inadequate. How could I face her, knowing the contempt I had so freely bestowed upon her? My first instinct, born of a lifetime of transactional problem-solving, was to throw money at it. I could send a substantial check, perhaps an anonymous donation to a charity for the hearing impaired in her name. Or I could go back to the Sterling Spoon, find her, and offer her a significant sum, perhaps even try to arrange for a better job, a less noisy environment. That was my way of fixing things, financial compensation. It was clean, it was efficient, and it allowed me to avoid the messy emotional entanglements of true human interaction. It would be my false resolution, a way to salve my conscience without truly confronting the depth of my own failing. Direct interaction, one. And if it were you, would you have swallowed your pride and truly confronted your wrongdoing? Or would you have tried to bury it with a grand public gesture that was more about saving face? Think about it. I decided I would go to the Sterling Spoon the next day, early, before the usual breakfast rush, and speak to Marcus. He seemed to know something about her. He could tell me what charity, if any, she supported, or if she was looking for other opportunities. I would frame it as an anonymous benefactor, someone who had simply heard about her good work and wanted to help. It felt like a plausible cover story, a way to mitigate my guilt without having to bare my soul. It was a strategy designed to protect my ego, to distance myself from the direct impact of my actions. I would be the benevolent, unseen force, rather than the callous perpetrator. That night, I found myself staring out the panoramic windows of my penthouse apartment, the glittering expanse of the city stretching endlessly before me. Usually this view filled me with a sense of accomplishment, a silent affirmation of my dominance. Tonight it felt empty, vast, and isolating. The city lights, usually symbols of opportunity and power, seemed to mock my inner turmoil, highlighting my solitude. I remembered my father's words, long dismissed. "Arthur, don't let the height of your buildings obscure the ground where people actually live." I had scoffed at him then, convinced that my success meant I was above the mundane struggles of ordinary life. Now those words echoed with an unsettling prescience. I thought about the analyst I had humiliated all those years ago. Had he too carried a hidden burden? Had my words, my unchecked arrogance contributed to his disappearance, his despair? The thought was a bitter pill to swallow. I had always believed my actions were justified, necessary steps in the ruthless climb to the top. But what if the top was just a lonely, cold peak, devoid of humanity? The silence of my sprawling apartment, usually a welcome respite from the cacophony of the financial world, now felt oppressive. There was no one to share this sudden, disorienting revelation with, no one to confess my shame to. My relationships were transactional, built on power dynamics and mutual gain, not on vulnerability or genuine connection. My ex-wife, Evelyn, had often accused me of being emotionally stunted, of valuing money more than people. I had dismissed her as overly dramatic, too sensitive for the demands of my world. Now her words too returned to haunt me, sharp and accurate. I remembered a small, significant detail from my conversation with her. She had told me once, during an argument about my lack of empathy, that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, Arthur, but in the richness of your connections, the kindness you offer, the humanity you protect. I had laughed then, a cold, dismissive laugh, telling her that such idealism had no place in the real world. Now I wondered if she had been right all along. The loneliness I felt, despite my immense wealth and power, was a stark counterpoint to the vibrant connections I saw other people share. The night wore on, a relentless cycle of self-recrimination and futile attempts to devise a foolproof fix. My mind, usually so sharp and analytical, felt muddled, weighed down by this unfamiliar emotional burden. I couldn't sleep. The city outside my window, usually a comforting presence, now felt indifferent to my internal struggle. I was just one man, lost in the vastness, grappling with a truth that had been hidden from me by my own arrogance, a truth revealed by a quiet waitress and a casual comment. It was a humbling, humiliating experience, and it chipped away at the very foundation of my identity as Arthur Sterling, the invincible, the uncompromising. I needed a strategy, a plan. My natural inclination was to control the narrative, to manage the damage. But this time, it wasn't about public perception, it was about internal reckoning. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't entirely sure how to proceed. The usual rules of engagement didn't apply. This wasn't a hostile takeover or a shrewd investment. This was about a human being and my unforgivable lapse in judgment. I was contemplating my approach, mentally drafting an anonymous letter or a subtle inquiry through a third party. My thoughts were consumed by how to make amends without revealing my identity as the offender. I wanted to alleviate the guilt, to erase the memory of her hurt expression without having to face the full weight of my own actions. This was my attempt at a false resolution, a characteristic maneuver to solve a problem with money and distance. I could imagine the scenario, a small, discreet package delivered containing a generous amount, perhaps with a note from an admirer. It would be enough to significantly help her, I reasoned, without involving a direct, painful confrontation. This plan, however, felt hollow even as I formulated it. It was a band-aid on a gaping wound, a way for me to feel better, not truly make amends. And what if she traced it back to me? The thought struck me, and a fresh wave of anxiety washed over me. The last thing I wanted was for her to know that her tormentor was also her anonymous benefactor. That would be an even greater insult, a demonstration of my manipulative power, my inability to apologize genuinely. No, this had to be handled with extreme care, with an almost surgical precision to ensure anonymity. I would need to engage a third party, someone utterly discreet, someone who could act as an intermediary without betraying my involvement. The thought of all this subterfuge, however, only added to my growing disquiet. It felt like I was plotting a covert operation rather than seeking genuine redemption. My methods were all wrong, yet I knew no other way. This was the only language my world understood: control, strategy, and calculated moves. But something deep inside told me that this problem demanded a different lexicon, one I had long forgotten how to speak. What would you do in my place? Would you try to make a grand anonymous gesture or face the music directly? Share your thoughts below. The next morning I drove to the Sterling Spoon earlier than usual, the streets still damp from a pre-dawn drizzle, the city just beginning to stir with its characteristic frenetic energy. My Mercedes glided silently through the awakening metropolis, a cocoon of luxury that felt increasingly dissonant with my inner turmoil. I parked across the street, opting to walk the last block, feeling an uncharacteristic need for the cold bite of the morning air, hoping it might clear my muddled mind. The restaurant sign, gleaming faintly in the pale light, seemed to mock my apprehension. As I approached the entrance, I saw Marcus sweeping the sidewalk, a rare sight, as that was usually the task of the younger staff. He looked up, his eyes widening slightly as he saw me. "Mr. Sterling," he said, a hint of surprise in his voice, "you're here quite early today." "Indeed, Marcus," I replied, trying to project my usual air of confident authority, though my voice felt a little strained. "I wanted to speak with you if you have a moment. Privately." He nodded, leaning his broom against the wall. "Of course, sir. Come in." We just opened. Inside, the restaurant was quiet, save for the low hum of the kitchen and the distant clatter of dishes. The tables were pristine, still awaiting the day's first patrons. The scent of fresh coffee hung in the air, but today it offered no comfort. We settled into a secluded booth, not my usual one, but one near the back, offering a semblance of privacy. "It's about Sarah," I began, cutting straight to the chase. My voice was lower than usual, almost hesitant. I understand she has a hearing impairment." Marcus's expression remained unreadable for a moment, then softened slightly. "Yes, sir. She wears a hearing aid. She's been partially deaf since she was a child. A bad ear infection that wasn't properly treated when she was young, living in a less fortunate neighborhood. She doesn't like to talk about it." A wave of profound shame washed over me. Less fortunate neighborhood. My mind immediately conjured images of the grittier parts of Brooklyn, areas I had only ever seen from the tinted windows of my car, places that felt a world away from my gilded existence. The casually delivered detail only intensified the weight of my transgression. My insult wasn't just cruel. It was an act of privilege, delivered with the blind entitlement of someone who had never known a moment of hardship. "She's a hard worker, Mr. Sterling," Marcus continued, his voice steady, though his gaze was direct, almost challenging. "Works 2 jobs, this one and another one at a small cafe downtown, trying to put her younger brother through community college. Her mother passed a few years ago, and her father, well, he's not in the picture." Each word Marcus uttered was a hammer blow to my carefully constructed self-image. Deaf and useless. The words echoed in my ears, amplified by the revelations of her struggles. A young woman, orphaned, supporting her brother, working tirelessly despite a disability, and I had, in my arrogance, heaped scorn upon her. The sheer, unadulterated cruelty of my actions was laid bare before me. I want to help," I stammered, the words feeling utterly inadequate. "I made a mistake, Marcus. A terrible one. I want to apologize, properly." Marcus looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, but also a hint of something else, something I couldn't quite decipher. "An apology might be a good start, sir, but Sarah, she's not easily impressed by words, or by money, for that matter. She's got a lot of pride." His words deflated my carefully planned false resolution, involving an anonymous donation. Marcus, in his quiet wisdom, had seen right through my attempt to buy my way out of guilt. He knew Sarah better than I could ever hope to. "What do you suggest?" I asked, feeling unusually vulnerable. This was uncharted territory for me. I was used to giving orders, not asking for guidance, especially from someone I considered staff. Marcus hesitated, then spoke, his voice thoughtful. "She lives in an old apartment building in Bushwick. It's not great. Always problems with the building. The landlord doesn't care much. Lately, the heating's been on the fritz. With winter coming on, it's a real struggle for her and her brother." Bushwick. Another name that invoked images of struggle, of a life so far removed from my own that it might as well have been on a different planet. My mind Ever the calculating machine immediately began to churn with practical solutions. I owned several properties in the city, residential and commercial. I could offer her a better apartment, discreetly, of course, or perhaps fund the repairs in her current building, again, anonymously. These were tangible, actionable steps, things I understood. But as I considered these options, a memory from my own childhood, long suppressed, surfaced with startling clarity. I was about 8 years old, a skinny, timid kid, far removed from the formidable man I had become. We lived in a modest house in Queens, my father working long hours, my mother struggling to make ends meet. I had been excited about a new baseball glove, saving up my allowance for months. When I finally bought it, a cheap synthetic leather glove that smelled faintly of plastic, I was overjoyed. I brought it to school, eager to show it off, only for a group of older boys, sons of successful doctors and lawyers, to snatch it from me. They had laughed, tossing it back and forth, calling it trash, worthless, before one of them deliberately scuffed it with his shoe, leaving a permanent, ugly mark. I remembered the hot flush of shame, the burning tears I refused to shed, the feeling of utter powerlessness as they mocked my cheap glove, my humble origins. I had gone home, locked myself in my room and cried silently, not just for the damaged glove, but for the raw humiliation, the stark realization that I was somehow less than. My father, noticing my distress, had gently taken the glove, polished it, and then spent hours playing catch with me in the backyard, teaching me how to break it in properly. He never once mentioned the other boys, but his quiet act of care, his unspoken understanding, had been a far greater comfort than any words of advice or anger could have been. He had made me feel seen, valued, despite the world's harsh judgment. That memory, raw and potent, resonated deeply. It wasn't about the glove, but about the feeling of being scorned, dismissed, made to feel small and insignificant. And that was exactly what I had done to Sarah. My words, deaf and useless, had been far more damaging than any scuff mark on a cheap glove. They had targeted her identity, her worth, her very being, and my attempts to fix it with money, however well-intentioned, felt as superficial as trying to buy a new expensive glove for that humiliated 8-year-old self, rather than truly acknowledging the pain of the scuffed one. "Marcus," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "I can't just throw money at this. Not this time. I need to truly understand. I need to apologize to her face to face." The words, once so impossible to utter, now felt strangely liberating, though they were still fraught with fear and uncertainty. The idea of facing her, of seeing that hurt in her eyes again, was terrifying, but the alternative, living with the gnawing guilt, the empty satisfaction of a superficial fix, was even worse. Marcus nodded slowly, a hint of something resembling approval in his gaze. "That's a start, Mr. Sterling. But don't expect it to be easy. She's a tough one, and she's heard plenty of apologies that meant nothing." His words were a cold splash of reality, tempering my nascent hope. This wouldn't be a quick transaction. This would be a journey, a difficult one, into the messy, uncomfortable terrain of genuine human connection and genuine remorse. For Arthur Sterling, the man who had built his life on avoiding such complexities, it was a terrifying prospect. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like the right one. The memory of my father, his quiet strength, his unwavering humanity, flickered like a distant beacon, guiding me towards a path I had long abandoned. I knew, unequivocally, that I had to shed the skin of the arrogant billionaire, at least for a moment, and approach Sarah not as her superior, but as a flawed, deeply regretful human being. It was a terrifying, yet strangely compelling thought. Did that memory of my childhood surprise you? Does it change your perception of me at all? Let me know in the comments. That day, instead of heading straight to my office, a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the city, I walked. I walked aimlessly at first, the crisp morning air doing little to dissipate the storm brewing within me. My usual brisk stride, purposeful and efficient, was replaced by a slower, more pensive pace. I found myself noticing things I usually overlooked: the intricate gargoyles on old buildings, the vibrant chaos of a street vendor's flower stall, the genuine laughter of children heading to school. These were the textures of life, the small, beautiful details that my relentless pursuit of wealth and power had rendered invisible. My mind kept replaying Marcus's words. She works 2 jobs, trying to put her younger brother through community college. Her mother passed a few years ago. Her father, well, he's not in the picture. Each phrase painted a vivid picture of struggle, resilience, and quiet determination. It was a stark contrast to my own life, where every need was anticipated, every comfort provided, every obstacle removed by an army of assistants and consultants. My insult, hurled so casually, now felt like an act of unspeakable violence against someone fighting to simply survive, let alone thrive. I decided that simply going back to the restaurant and offering a verbal apology felt inadequate. Marcus had been right. Sarah had likely heard many empty apologies. I needed to understand her world, not just intellectually, but viscerally. I needed to see the ground where people actually lived, as my father had once put it. My first stop was the cafe Marcus had mentioned. It was a bustling, lively place, far removed from the hushed elegance of the Sterling Spoon. The air was thick with the aroma of strong coffee and toasted bagels, the clatter of ceramic mugs, and the cheerful chatter of customers, creating a vibrant, almost cacophonous symphony. It was exactly the kind of environment where someone with a hearing impairment would struggle. I found a corner table, a discreet vantage point, and ordered a plain black coffee. I watched and waited. After about an hour, I saw her, Sarah. She was behind the counter, deftly managing multiple orders, her movements fluid and efficient despite the constant stream of customers. She wore a simple black apron over a practical long-sleeved shirt, her dark hair still pulled back in that slightly unruly ponytail. Her face, in the harsher fluorescent lighting of the cafe, looked a little more tired, a little older than she had seemed in the soft glow of the Sterling Spoon. But her eyes, those striking hazel eyes, still held that quiet intensity. I observed her interactions. She leaned in often when customers spoke, her head tilted slightly, a subtle gesture I now understood. Sometimes she would ask them to repeat themselves, but always with a polite smile, never a hint of frustration. Most customers were patient, obliging, but a few, caught in the rush of their own day, would grow impatient, their voices rising, their gestures becoming more animated. I saw her wince once, almost imperceptibly, when a man barked his order at her. Yet she maintained her composure, her professionalism unwavering. A memory flashed through my mind, my own impatience, my raised voice, the word deaf hurled at her like a stone. I felt a fresh wave of self-loathing wash over me. I had been that impatient man, only far worse, cloaked in the armor of my wealth and status. My anger had been born of entitlement, not necessity. Her quiet struggle, her daily battles against a world not designed for her, suddenly became agonizingly real. I spent nearly 3 hours at the cafe, just observing. It was an exercise in humility, a forced immersion into a reality so different from my own. I saw her cleaning tables, restocking supplies, laughing softly with a fellow barista. She wasn't useless, far from it. She was incredibly capable, resilient, a testament to the human spirit's ability to adapt and overcome. And I, with all my advantages, had chosen to see only her perceived flaws, to magnify them with my cruel words. As her shift neared its end, I saw her slip something into a small, worn backpack, a textbook. Marcus had mentioned her brother was in community college. Was she studying too? The thought added another layer to her already impressive resilience. She truly was remarkable, and I, Arthur Sterling, had been utterly blind. After she left, I discreetly approached one of the other baristas. "I'm looking to send a thank you gift to Sarah," I said, trying to sound casual. "She served me so wonderfully a few times. Do you know where she's studying, or perhaps her brother's college?" The barista, a friendly young man with an array of piercings, grinned. "Oh, Sarah? Yeah, she's amazing. She's actually taking a few evening classes herself, trying to get her GED and then maybe apply to City College. And her brother Leo, he's at LaGuardia Community College studying nursing. She works so hard for him. She's saving up for his tuition and for her own classes. They live in Bushwick, pretty far out near the L train." My initial plan for a grand anonymous financial gesture felt even more inadequate now. What she needed wasn't just money thrown at a problem, but genuine support, an acknowledgement of her journey, her aspirations. Her brother Leo, studying nursing. That struck a chord. My own mother had been a nurse, a fact I rarely mentioned, seeing it as too mundane for my high-flying world. But now it felt like a silent, poignant connection. I returned to my office, but the day's financial reports and market analyses seemed distant, irrelevant. My mind was consumed by Sarah, by Leo, by Bushwick. I pulled up property records, cross-referencing addresses in Bushwick, looking for the building Marcus had mentioned, the one with heating problems. It was a dilapidated tenement, clearly neglected by its absentee landlord. My empire included a vast real estate portfolio. I could acquire that building, renovate it, and offer Sarah and Leo a rent-free apartment. It was a grand gesture, yes, but it felt more personal, more impactful than just a check. It addressed a fundamental need, a physical improvement to their lives. But the shame of my past actions still clung to me like a shroud. How could I do this anonymously, without her realizing it was me, Arthur Sterling, the man who had called her deaf and useless? The act of true generosity, I realized, would be tainted if it came from the source of her pain. It would become a transaction of guilt, not a genuine act of compassion. This was my personal dilemma, a crucible forging a new moral compass within me. Can you imagine the depth of that internal conflict? How would you balance the desire to help with the fear of being seen as the villain? I decided that the anonymous route was still necessary for the immediate future. I called my most trusted real estate attorney, a sharp, discreet woman named Ms. Davies. "I need you to acquire a specific building in Bushwick," I instructed, giving her the address. "And I want it done with absolute discretion. No one is to know I am the buyer. Create a shell corporation, use a third party, and once it's acquired, I want it thoroughly renovated, starting with the heating system and basic structural repairs. The current tenants are to be given first refusal on renewed leases at significantly reduced rates. And if any specific apartment becomes available, I want it offered to a young woman named Sarah and her brother Leo. Rent-free, indefinitely, all under the strictest confidence." Ms. Davies, accustomed to my demanding and often unconventional requests, simply replied, "Understood, Mr. Sterling. Consider it done, but may I ask, what is the motivation behind this particular acquisition?" I hesitated. "Let's just say, Ms. Davies, that it's an investment in redemption." The word felt foreign on my tongue, but also strangely right. It was an investment not in financial gain, but in something far more profound, the possibility of reclaiming a piece of my own lost humanity. The renovation project would be substantial, costing millions, but the value I placed on this act far exceeded any monetary sum. It was about rebuilding not just a building, but a fractured sense of self. This complex plan, while addressing the practical needs of Sarah and Leo, still bypassed the crucial step of a direct, heartfelt apology. It was still a false resolution, albeit a grander, more elaborate one. I was still trying to orchestrate events from a safe distance, controlling the outcome without exposing my raw vulnerability. My pride, though bruised, was still stubbornly intact, preventing me from taking the one step that truly mattered, facing Sarah, genuinely, humbly. The wealth that had once given me such power now felt like a gilded cage, trapping me in my own patterns of avoidance and emotional distance. I was Arthur Sterling, the hidden billionaire, orchestrating lives from the shadows, but increasingly aware of the cold, sterile reality of my own isolated existence. The knowledge that I was doing something tangible, something genuinely good, brought a fleeting sense of relief, but it was quickly overshadowed by the persistent echo of deaf and useless, a haunting reminder of the personal apology I still owed, and the courage I still lacked to deliver it. Weeks turned into a month. Ms. Davies reported steady progress on the Bushwick acquisition. The Shell Corporation was established. The negotiations were underway, moving with the glacial pace typical of multi-layered real estate deals. In the meantime, I continued my routine, returning to the Sterling Spoon, always keeping an eye out for Sarah. She still hadn't returned. This ongoing absence gnawed at me, deepening the sense of unresolved guilt. Had my cruel words truly driven her away from a job she evidently needed? The thought was a constant heavy weight on my conscience. I continued to visit the cafe downtown, observing her from afar when I could. I saw her interacting with Leo, her younger brother, a tall, slender young man with kind eyes that mirrored hers. They would sit together during her break, hunched over textbooks, a shared camaraderie and determination radiating from them. She would patiently explain concepts, her finger tracing lines in the book, her expression one of gentle encouragement. Their bond was palpable, a stark contrast to the often transactional relationships I maintained. It further solidified my resolve to help them, but also intensified my shame. One crisp autumn afternoon, as I sat in the cafe, nursing a lukewarm coffee, I overheard a snippet of conversation between Sarah and Leo. They were talking about money, specifically about Leo's tuition. "I don't know, Sarah," Leo said, his voice laced with worry. "The scholarship only covers so much. And with Mom gone, I don't want you working yourself to death for me." Sarah squeezed his hand, her voice low but firm. "We'll figure it out, Leo. We always do. I picked up an extra shift at a new diner starting next week. It's a bit of a haul, but the pay's good. We'll make it work." An extra shift, another job, the sheer burden of her responsibilities, magnified by her physical challenge, weighed heavily on me. My carefully planned real estate intervention, though significant, felt distant, a slow-moving solution to an immediate, pressing problem. I needed to do something more direct, more personal, more immediate. The anonymous route suddenly felt like a coward's path, a way to avoid true responsibility. The next day, driven by an urgency I hadn't felt in years, I went back to the Sterling Spoon, specifically seeking out Marcus. "Marcus," I said, my voice firm, "I need to know where Sarah is working now, all her jobs. I need to speak with her." Marcus looked at me, a long, assessing gaze that seemed to penetrate my carefully constructed facade. "You ready for that, Mr. Sterling? Really ready?" "I am," I replied, my voice unwavering. "I need to make things right." He paused, then sighed, a subtle weariness in his eyes. "She picked up shifts at a place called Mama Rosie's Diner in Queens. It's a family-run joint, old school. Good food, but it's a grind. And she's still at the cafe downtown, of course. She usually closes there on Fridays. Mama Rosie's Diner, Queens, my childhood borough." The coincidence struck me as almost poetic, a cruel twist of fate bringing me back to my roots, to a place where I had once felt small and vulnerable. I drove there that evening, the neon sign of Mama Rosie's, a vibrant, kitschy glow against the encroaching dusk, beckoning me into a world far removed from the polished chrome and hushed luxury I was accustomed to. The diner was a vibrant symphony of clattering plates, sizzling griddles, and hearty laughter. The air was thick with the comforting smells of fried onions, coffee, and grilled cheese. It was noisy, boisterous, alive. And there she was, Sarah, weaving through the crowded tables, carrying plates laden with steaming food, her movements graceful despite the chaos. She looked even more tired here, the fluorescent lights highlighting the dark circles under her eyes, but her smile when she gave it to a customer was genuine and warm. I found a booth in the back, obscured by a strategically placed jukebox. I ordered a burger and fries, barely touching them, my eyes fixed on Sarah. I watched her struggle to hear a customer's order over the din, leaning in, asking for repetitions, a small frown of concentration on her face. I saw the flash of impatience on the customer's face, the slight shrug of annoyance. And then I saw it. The customer, an older man with a booming voice, leaned forward and, almost jokingly, mimed speaking louder. "What? Are you deaf, sweetheart?" he chuckled, loud enough for a few nearby tables to hear. Sarah's smile faltered, just for a split second. Her cheeks flushed and she looked down, her shoulders slumping almost imperceptibly before she forced a smile back onto her face and nodded, taking the order. It was a microaggression, a casual dismissal, far less overtly cruel than my own words, but devastating in its cumulative effect. And I watched her endure it, again and again, with a quiet strength that shamed me to my core. My insult, deaf and useless, now felt like a blaring siren in my mind, echoing the casual cruelty of the world she navigated every single day. She wasn't just deaf. She was navigating a world built for the hearing, constantly having to adapt, to push harder, to be more resilient than anyone else. And I had, in my privileged ignorance, amplified that struggle, adding to her burden instead of alleviating it. This was the true inversion of roles. I, the supposedly powerful man, was the one who was truly blind, deaf to the struggles of others, useless in my inability to see beyond my own ego. This was the pivotal moment, the third virada, the truth coming to light in a way that shattered my perception. It wasn't just that she had a hearing aid, it was the entire hidden life of quiet struggle, the constant battle against a world that didn't understand, didn't care, and often actively mocked her for something beyond her control. My own initial outburst was not just a mistake, but a profound act of systemic cruelty, reflecting a larger world that was, in its own way, deaf to the needs of its most vulnerable. I rose from the booth, my heart pounding, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. I needed to speak to her, now. The carefully planned, anonymous benevolence, the subtle real estate acquisition, all of it suddenly felt like a flimsy shield, a cowardly evasion. It wasn't about fixing the heating in her apartment or paying her brother's tuition anymore. It was about acknowledging her humanity, admitting my profound error, and facing the consequences. It was about shedding the last vestiges of Arthur Sterling, the arrogant billionaire, and becoming for the first time in decades just Arthur, a man grappling with his own fallibility. Have you ever seen someone endure casual cruelty like that and realized your own past mistakes in a new light? Share your experience in the comments. My legs felt heavy, my movements clumsy as I walked towards the counter, where Sarah was now wiping down the surface, a weary but determined expression on her face. The diner's noise, which moments ago had seemed like a cacophonous symphony, now faded into a dull roar. My focus narrowed entirely on her. My carefully constructed world, once so robust and impregnable, felt fragile, on the verge of collapsing under the immense weight of my newly awakened conscience. Every step I took felt like a step into uncharted territory, away from the familiar comfort of my power and towards the terrifying vulnerability of genuine remorse. She looked up as I approached, her hazel eyes widening in recognition, a flicker of surprise and something akin to apprehension crossing her features. The smile she had given to the customers faded, replaced by a guarded neutrality. "Mr. Sterling?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. Her brow furrowed, as if trying to recall the exact details of our last, tumultuous encounter. I stopped directly in front of her. My hands, usually so steady and commanding, now felt clammy and unsure. I could feel the eyes of other customers on me, drawn by the sudden, palpable tension. This wasn't the sterling spoon, where my presence was anticipated, almost revered. Here, I was just another face, albeit one that undoubtedly stood out in my expensive suit amidst the worn booths and checkered floor. "Sarah," I began. My voice, usually so resonant and authoritative, was barely a whisper, rough with emotion. I had rehearsed apologies in my head countless times, eloquent speeches crafted to convey both regret and a subtle hint of my underlying benevolence. But now all those words dissolved, leaving only a raw, guttural honesty. I came here to apologize, properly." She simply stared at me, her expression unreadable, a silent challenge in her gaze. She didn't offer a polite dismissal, didn't try to diffuse the situation. She waited, patiently, for me to continue. It was a testament to her strength, her quiet resolve that she wouldn't make this easy for me, and she shouldn't. "The other day," I continued, my voice gaining a little strength, though it still trembled slightly, "at the Sterling Spoon, I called you deaf and useless." Those words, they were cruel, unforgivable, and I was wrong, Sarah. So profoundly wrong. My eyes met hers, holding them, refusing to look away, to hide behind my wealth or status. I needed her to see the genuine remorse etched onto my face, in the depths of my eyes. A small, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her. Her lips parted, as if to speak, but she remained silent. "I found out about your hearing," I confessed, the words spilling out, laced with self-loathing. "I overheard it at the cafe. And then Marcus. He told me about your life, your brother, your mother, everything. And I realized what an ignorant, arrogant fool I had been. To judge you so harshly, so casually, for something that is a challenge you face every single day, with such incredible strength and resilience." My voice cracked on the last word. "There's no excuse for my behavior. None. I was blinded by my own privilege, my own arrogance, and I inflicted pain on you without a second thought. And for that, I am truly deeply sorry." The confession hung in the air, heavy and raw. I had laid bare my shame, my guilt, my profound regret. It was a terrifying act of vulnerability, one I hadn't engaged in since I was a child. The diner's noise seemed to fade into the background, all attention, both real and imagined, focused on this tense, emotionally charged exchange. This was my deepest conflict, choosing between the pride that had built my empire and the humility required for true atonement. Sarah's gaze remained steady, unwavering, a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "It's not the first time I've heard words like that, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice still quiet, but with an underlying steel that surprised me, "and probably won't be the last. People see what they want to see, especially when they're in a hurry or when they feel entitled." Her words were not an absolution, but a quiet indictment, a stark reminder of the broader societal issue that my personal failing had merely epitomized. She wasn't angry. She was simply stating a painful truth, a truth born of lived experience. It was a more powerful rebuke than any shouted accusation could have been. "I know it won't be the last," I agreed, my voice thick with emotion, "but it will be the last time from me. I want to make amends, not just with words. I've been doing some things in the background to help with your housing and your brother's tuition, discreetly. I revealed the real estate acquisition, the renovations, the rent-free offer, the tuition support, laying out my carefully orchestrated plan, now feeling inadequate in the face of her quiet dignity. It's not meant to erase what I said, or to buy my way out of this. It's a genuine attempt to support you, to make a tangible difference in your lives in a way that truly matters." She listened, her expression slowly shifting from guarded neutrality to a mix of surprise and a cautious wonder. Her eyes, usually so focused and determined, softened, a hint of vulnerability now showing. You bought the building?" she whispered, the enormity of my gesture clearly registering. "And for Leo's tuition?" "Yes," I confirmed, "and it's all arranged. You and Leo will have a secure home, rent-free, for as long as you need it, and his nursing education is fully funded. And yours, if you decide to pursue City College." I hesitated, then added, "It's the least I can do, Sarah. It's a start. A way to try and balance the scales, even just a little. Direct interaction too. You might think you know someone from a single interaction, but what if there's a whole life hidden beneath the surface? What would you do if you were faced with that truth? Would you acknowledge the depth of your mistakes, or retreat into your comfort zone?" She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze dropping to the countertop, then back to my face. I braced myself for rejection, for anger, for anything. But what she said next disarmed me completely. "My mom used to say," she began, her voice soft, almost lyrical, "that sometimes the most stubborn hearts are the ones that learn the most, and that real kindness isn't about what you give, but what you understand." She looked at me, a faint, genuine smile finally gracing her lips. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling, truly, for all of it, but especially for coming here, for saying all of that." Her gaze held mine, a silent acknowledgement of my personal struggle, my own painful transformation. It wasn't a full forgiveness, not yet, but it was acceptance, an acknowledgement that my attempt at atonement, however clumsy, however late, was genuine. The weight that had been crushing me began to lift, a breath of fresh air filling my lungs after months of suffocating guilt. It wasn't the triumphant feeling of closing a billion-dollar deal, but something far more profound, far more humbling. It was the quiet, almost overwhelming sensation of finally being seen, not as Arthur Sterling, the untouchable mogul, but as a fallible human being capable of growth, capable of change. The hidden theme, the fragility of human relations in the face of power, now resonated deeply. My power had not only alienated me from others, but had also blinded me to my own humanity. Sarah, in her quiet strength and resilience, had inadvertently become the catalyst for my own spiritual awakening, forcing me to confront the hollowness of a life built solely on wealth and control. I realized that my empire, for all its grandeur, had been built on a foundation of emotional scarcity, a fortress designed to keep others out and my own vulnerabilities hidden. Now a crack had appeared, allowing a sliver of light, and with it the terrifying yet exhilarating possibility of a new beginning. My conflict, my choice between pride and humanity, had been answered. And the answer wasn't a grand logical calculation, but a raw emotional leap of faith into the uncomfortable terrain of truth and vulnerability. It was the moment I realized that my greatest asset wasn't my bank account, but my capacity for empathy, a capacity I had long suppressed. And it was a realization that would forever alter the course of my life, irrevocably changing the meaning of wealth for Arthur Sterling. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity, but a different kind of activity than I was accustomed to. Miss Davies expedited the Bushwick building acquisition. The renovations began with unprecedented speed, transforming the dilapidated tenement into a safe, warm, and dignified home for its residents. Sarah and Leo, along with their neighbors, moved into newly renovated apartments, their faces a mixture of disbelief and profound gratitude. Sarah's apartment in particular was spacious, bright, and utterly transformed, a quiet sanctuary from the constant demands of her multiple jobs. Leo's tuition was indeed secured, allowing him to focus on his nursing studies without the crushing weight of financial anxiety. He even managed to get a small paid internship at a local clinic, easing his burden further. I still visited the cafe, not as an observer, but as a patron. I saw Sarah there, her smile a little brighter, a little less strained, her shoulders not quite as burdened. We exchanged polite greetings, sometimes a brief, comfortable conversation. She never explicitly thanked me again for the housing or the tuition. Her gratitude was evident in her eyes, in her newfound lightness, in the genuine warmth of her smile. It was a silent understanding, a bridge built not just with money, but with genuine acknowledgement and respect. I also returned to the sterling spoon, though less frequently. When I did, Sarah was often working, having returned after the building renovations provided her with more stability. Our interactions there were still professional, but beneath the surface a subtle shift had occurred. There was an unspoken camaraderie, a shared understanding of a moment that had irrevocably altered both our lives. I no longer demanded perfection with a harsh tone, but offered polite requests, followed by genuine thanks. I even found myself listening more intently to Marcus, asking about his family, truly engaging with the people who served me, seeing them not as cogs in a machine, but as individuals with their own stories, their own struggles, their own quiet dignities. The climax of my internal struggle wasn't a sudden dramatic explosion, but a slow, quiet unraveling of my old self, replaced by a more empathetic, more human version of Arthur Sterling. I found myself drawn to philanthropic endeavors, not just for tax benefits or public image, but for a genuine desire to make a difference. I started looking into programs for the hearing impaired, investing in technologies that could make the world more accessible. My focus began to shift from solely accumulating wealth to leveraging it for social good, a concept that would have been anathema to the old me. The final turn, the ambiguous conclusion, was that the justice was indeed served, but with a profound emotional loss for my old identity. The money was still there, vast and formidable, but its meaning had fundamentally changed. It was no longer just a tool for power and control, but a vehicle for connection, for repair, for redemption. The hidden billionaire was no longer hiding, but beginning to emerge, shedding the layers of arrogance and isolation. The price of this redemption was the loss of my imperviousness, the shattering of my carefully constructed ego, but in its place, I found something far more valuable. A connection to my own humanity, a renewed sense of purpose that transcended the balance sheet. I remembered my father, his kind eyes, his weathered hands. He would have been proud, I thought, not of my billions, but of this hard-won shift in my heart. His words about not letting the height of my buildings obscure the ground where people lived finally truly resonated. I was no longer just building structures of steel and glass. I was trying to build bridges of understanding and empathy. The sting of my cruel words, deaf and useless, would likely never fully fade. It remained a constant, visceral reminder of the darkness I was capable of and the profound transformation I had undergone. But now, when those words echoed in my mind, they were no longer a source of self-justification, but a catalyst for continuous introspection, a constant reminder to listen, to truly see, to lead with empathy rather than arrogance. Sarah, in her quiet strength, had held up a mirror to my soul, forcing me to confront the grotesque reflection of my own unexamined privilege. And in that confrontation, I found not just shame, but a path toward a richer, more meaningful existence. She had not only put me in my place, she had shown me a different world, one where true wealth was indeed measured not in dollars, but in the richness of human connection, the kindness offered, and the humanity protected. She looked at me and smiled, a genuine understanding smile, as if she had won. The bank account was intact, perhaps even growing, but my old heart, it was not. And if in the end the deaf and useless waitress had taught the rich man to truly hear, then who was truly the richer one? If this content opened your mind, comment below, "I made it to the end." This helps me understand who is really seeking knowledge beyond the surface. Like the video, subscribe to the channel now, and hit that notification bell, because the next episodes go even deeper. And don't leave without clicking on the next video. It's the continuation of this journey,